Big news for anyone who loves the history of D-Day. Matt McLachlan Battlefield Tours has just launched a brand new tour that visits the D-Day beaches and lots of other sites in rural France, and all from the comfort of a luxurious cruise on the Seine River. Now, we ran this tour in 2024 and it was a huge success. It sold out in a matter of weeks. So now we've rolled it out again for 2025. But this time, there'll be 3 departures in June, July and September, giving you 3 times the opportunity to join us. The cruise is on board the luxurious Amadeus Diamond and begins and ends in Paris. Over 8 days, you'll enjoy the history, scenery and culture of the beautiful Seine River. But as an exclusive offering just for our passengers, you'll enjoy 2 full days touring the D-Day landing beaches in both the US and British sectors, plus daily seminars on board the ship that unpack the history of D-Day. And like all our tours, you'll be hosted by one of our expert historians who'll bring the story of D-Day to life. And if you've been on one of our tours before, you'll know that our historians really are the best there is. This is an exclusive cruise and places are extremely limited. Visit battlefields.com.au to book your place today.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous 2-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. It's guaranteed perfection in every single bite. And right now, you can save on unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, score an extra $30 off with promo code HOLIDAY. With 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steak experience. And the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages featuring gourmet favorites. From legendary steaks to mouth-watering desserts and more. Save 50% off site-wide for a limited time at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code HOLIDAY. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com. And an extra $30 off with promo code HOLIDAY. Minimum purchase may apply.
A Living History production.
I'm Peter Hart.
And I'm Gary Bain.
And together we're Pete and Gary's Military History
Podcast. Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is our 150th, so something special. Who thought we'd live so long? And how are we celebrating the 150th episode, Pete? We're doing nothing, aren't we?
We've got a special episode with Nicolai Eberholst, our favourite.
Hey. So would this by any chance be the Austro-Hungary and the Eastern Front 1917? Because we've done 19, 14, 15 and 16.
I think you're probably
right. It's a good guess, yeah.
Hey,
but as we will see, it's probably going to be a little less Austria-Hungary this time. Because of events.
For 150th is the subject we know absolutely nothing about and get somebody else to do it.
That's the spirit.
I'm honoured.
Go on, give us an introduction, and what are we doing? Where are we? Where are we? What's happening?
We are
Who am I?
in 1917. We are in 1917, and last time we talked a bit about what happened in 1916, and a whole lot happened in 1916. But really entering 1917, we're also entering probably one of the least understood and most complicated chapters of the entire war, and really this is where the overall history of what's going on is pretty much overshadowed by this thing, the revolution, which we haven't talked about yet, which we will get to in a moment. But we sometimes forget that there's more than one revolution. There's a whole lot of things happening in between. There's a whole lot of fighting, even though we sometimes think that fighting just ended with a revolution in the East and nothing else from there on. So a lot happens on the Eastern Front in 1917, 18, and even into 1919. And it's also one of the most consequential periods in modern history, really, because besides being an extremely interesting period from a military historian's point of view, it's also one of these turning points in history, and a lot of the things that we know from the late on in the 20th century is really kicked off here.
Well, it's really seismic, isn't it? It's something that impacts not only the time period, but the whole of the 20th century.
Yeah, and he is right. But surprisingly, it's not something that is often covered in a lot of books about the war. You sometimes hear it in or read it in books about the revolution or other things, but about the war, this part is often a little murky, to say the least. Even something like Norman Stone's classic book on the Eastern Front is dated 1914 to 17, but he really doesn't cover much after the Brusilov offensive up to the February Revolution, and nothing after that really is covered. So it is not understood, but even preparing for this episode, I think we wanted to do a 17-18, and just there's so much happening here that it's impossible to do in one episode. So we have to split it up again. So we're doing 17.
So where had we left the Austro-Hungarian army? How are they faring?
Well, the short term is just exhausted because we heard about the Brusilov offensive last time, and the army is completely beat after this, we talked about the victory, the Russian victory there being largely a Pyrrhic victory, but it really severely damaged the Austro-Hungarian army, and they will not recover from this, which is also why in this episode we're going to hear a little less about them than maybe in the other ones, because there are other people ready to take over in a way, but we'll get to that.
So there's your leadership.
Yeah, there is.
Did you know about that, Gary?
Yeah, it wouldn't be the notes.
No. So Conrad's out and ours is in. Your arse is in, isn't it, Pete?
Oh, dear.
But what happens in late 1916 is that the emperor dies, and Austria-Hungary gets a new emperor. So Franz Joseph, who is at that time 86, dies on the 21st of November 1916, and he was replaced by a new ruler in the form of Emperor Karl, who is only 34. I'm actually a little unsure. I think he's 34 when he dies. He's not 34 when he takes over.
He's definitely much easier to spell.
He's a younger guy. Yeah, exactly. But he's only been the heir apparent since the assassination of Franz Ferdinand in the summer, which kicked off this war. Previously, he sort of wanted to be a military man. He wanted a military career. And during the war, he's held various military commands as a corps commander on the Italian front, later army commander on the Eastern front, fighting the Russians and the Romanians. And he's known as a commander who really cares about his men and doesn't want to see them die and suffer needlessly, really. So it should probably be no surprise that he's not a huge fan of Conrad, because that's a little in the other direction. So in early 1916, he replaces Conrad with a more manageable chief of staff in the form of Arthur von Sorry?
You said 16. You mean 17?
Oh, yeah, 17. Yeah, of course. He replaces Conrad with Arthur von Strausenberg, who is previously commanded the First Army in the Romanian campaign. And he is... Well, he's less political than Conrad. He's a little more of a yes man. He's not particularly capable compared to a lot of others, but he's easier to push around.
Hang on.
I mean, what Karl doesn't want is a Conrad who runs on his own will and has his own agenda in a way. He wants a man that he can manage.
So a bit of an arse licker.
Well done. Wonderful
worth
pun.
waiting for, Gary.
That was good.
Yeah. Oh, you worked on that one.
Oh, dear.
I can hear the applause on the internet now.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the abuse.
But the army really, the army that he gets is an army that has lost all ability to launch offensives, at least in the east. and especially without any German command. German aid, and it's an army that is subjected to more and more German rule and command. As we talked, there was the unification of command on the Eastern Front during the Brusilov offensive. That just gets more and more and more. Basically becomes a German command on the Eastern Front by this point. Also, Austro-Hungary starts to focus more on the Italian front. By end of 1916, they've managed to fight off 9 Italian offensives. And there will be more, of course, in 1917. So they have their hands full down there. And then you're also seeing a lack of equipment, lack of medicine, a lack of food, because this blockade, the naval blockade, is really beginning to bite a lot in Austria, as well as you're emptying your country of men that were needed in the industry, in farming, so on and so on. So you're really starting to see a lot of problems here that will only grow as well. And we have a quote here by a Czech telegraph officer of the 8th Cavalry Division called Vladimir Sukhori.
Towards evening, entire ranks of Russians climbed out of their trenches, unarmed, loaves of bread in their hands, and approached our wire barriers in front of our 11th Dragoon Regiment. As our patrols approached, the Russians burst into wild laughter and disappeared, waving their bread in the air. As they came unarmed, they were not fired upon. It was probably all just a joke. They were mocking our lack. It's lack of food, doesn't it? Our stomachs feel the increasingly reduced food rations. Here we are only dependent on the military kitchen. 2 days a week, so-called wild veterans, vegetables, i.e. nettles. Oh, yum, yum, Gary, your mouth must be watering. Milk thistle and others are prepared for the men as a side dish. We can shamelessly call this war the stomach war. Blimey, you've been fighting that a fair while, Gary.
I'd win.
Wretches from the working detachment, young lads come to us every day. They even kneel down and beg for bread, but the bread is not even enough for us. And the worst thing is that there is no hope for better times. This evening we were informed that the portions of bread and side dishes will be even smaller. How we were looking forward to the new harvest. And for now, instead of an allowance, we have to make do. Where are the golden days at the beginning of the war? We suffered from hunger, but it was only temporary, caused by poor communication and rapid constant movement of troops. But now it is permanent. We ate and drank well then when we were in the villages. Only when we camped in the open field or in the forest we were dependent on the military kitchen. Gone are those days.
So yeah, he writes that in his diary. He's feeling it, and he will feel it even more. And by the end of the war, the army is pretty much starving. At this point, they're just beginning to feel how it's going to be, and it's going to go down really bad.
So that's the Austro-Hungarians. Where are we with the German army, our friends in the east?
The Germans, they have no confidence in their Austro-Hungarian allies. After the Brusilov offensive, there is no belief in the capabilities of the Austro-Hungarian soldiers. They know that they need to allocate more troops to the east in the new year. They know that they need to take up most of the command in this area, and that they will have to carry this front almost on their own. Then there is also beginning to be a renewed focus on ending the war in the east. Especially, this will especially come with when the United States joins the war in April that year. But yeah, Hindenburg and Ludendorff are now commanders of the entire German war effort, while Max Hoffmann, who played an important role in the victory of Tannenberg in 1940, he's now the chief of staff of the German army in the east. So they are all people now that know that the war in the east is important and that you need to finish it before you can go after the west. That's their philosophy, and they share that. So that's going to be the major objective for the Germans in 1917.
And where does that leave the Russians then? We've mentioned on a number of occasions the enormous casualties that they were suffering.
Yeah, the army spent, as well as all the others. They have now suffered enormous casualties numerous times. We've gone through a lot of these battles, and they're always enormous casualties. So their offensive strength is also expended. There is no strength for any large offensives in the foreseeable future. And the army is beginning to reach some sort of breaking point, but it's still fighting. It's very important to say that the war is still going on. It's not like we get into 1917 and there's no fighting power left in the Russian army. They will fight, and they're still at the front. Even in January 1917, they're launching a series of offensives on the northern front. So the northern front will be around the Latvia area, on today's map around Riga. So they're actually going on the offensive. They don't come to anything, of course, but they are going on the offensive. So the soldiers are still fighting. But there's also a growing resentment on the home front. There is no end in sight at the front, and this we really see that now the war is dragging on, and it becomes clear that Russia probably not win this war, but has to find some way out of it. We have here an account by a British journalist, Robert Scotland Little. He's a journalist and a Red Cross volunteer with the Russian army, who writes about the what he sees at the front, this endlessness and the sameness.
There is a sameness about the trenches. Our Russian lines are all alike. Pine wooden trench supports, sandbags and works of earth, narrow loopholes for rifles and broader ones for mitrailleuses, and outside, westwards, zigzagging obstacles of wire. We see the enemy's domain. It looks to us just as our lines must look to him. We see his sandbags and his heaped up earth. We see the slits through which his bullets come. Although the enemy we do not see, we know his eyes are turned on us, while ours are fixed on where he is. There is a sameness in the land behind the Russian lines. The shell-pocked plains, the broken woods, the Derevny where soldiers live. Then, a Derevny is a construction, literal or figurative, whose sole purpose is to provide an external facade to a country that is faring badly, so that they believe you are faring better.
Oh, you're like a dictionary to me.
Well, that was from a dictionary. I'll continue. The Derevny, where soldiers live. Then there are the dugouts, too, roofed with earth and turf. There are the cooking wagons of the regiments. There are the men resting or eating from their blackened ration pans, or lined up for the drill. There is a sameness in the rough cart tracks, wide, rutted roads that widen as each week goes by. Rain falls, the roads are churned to mud, and then the drivers seek a better way and turn their horses' heads towards the rutless ground. Some fields are all a track. Reserve trenches lie unevenly across the land. Barbed wire is ready too, with gaps where traffic may pass through, and nearby trestle gates of wire to close them if need be. Shell wagons pass daily to and fro. 4 horses, 6, or even 8 are yoked to every one. Wagons of bread and ugly carcasses of meat. Wagons of hay tied up in bales, or corn in leaking sacks. Wagons of wire and staves and planks of wood. One sees them every day. And men, in ones and twos, the companies and regiments, they march across these tracks behind the lines. There is a sameness about them all. There is a sameness about the wounded. The monotony of war is this: guns and munitions and men and broken land and dead and wounded soldiers. The great coats splashed with blood and torn with shot, the bandages that look so doubly clean, the tired, grimed faces, how very much alike all are. Some men have greater wounds than others. Some have legs hurt and some are injured in the arm. Some have their heads bound up, others have body wounds. But one does not consider this. The place of wound, also its gravity, are merely indirect. The point one thinks of at the war is that this man is hurt, is that he cannot fight, is that another man must come to fill his place. 10 wounded, one may say, or 10 times 10. Other details are not for us to know. Let doctors fight with death to save their charge. Let nurses guide him night and day. The future of the soldier rests with God. The vital fact is, we must have another man, and the sum total of this sameness is usually the same. The situation remains unchanged.
Are you saying that he was all pretty samey?
I think it's pretty much the same.
There is a bit of sameness in it, isn't it? Yeah. No,
I'm
but
learning.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
What are the Russian plans for 1917? Go on, quickly.
Yeah, we'll do it quickly. Yeah, because even though this seems to be completely that the Russians can't do anything, there are big plans for 1917. There are several plans. There are some that want an offensive in the north around Riga. There are some that want an offensive to link up with Bulgaria. To link up with the Romanians and fight the Bulgarians, and all the way down to Turkey, knock Bulgaria out of the war. There are Brusilov, who wants a bigger offensive like the one he had before, and then there's the Tsar, who's trying to find the best way. But none of this is really realistic. They are, in fact, completely unrealistic. It's just an indication that there is no end in sight. Everybody's mind is still on continuing this war. But then something happens. And
What?
The February Revolution breaks out. The February Revolution breaks out in March because... because of course we're working with the old style of calendar that the Russians work, so it's in February for them, but it's in March for us. But I'm not going to go into the finer details of the revolution because we don't want to get bogged down in this. Too bad.
But suffice to say, the Tsar is replaced, isn't he, by a provisional government?
Yeah, he is replaced by a provisional government. It's important to say that this is not the Bolshevik revolution that we all know and love. But people are tired of the war, and especially the way the war is being waged. And remember, since 1915, the Tsar has been the head of the army, and so he receives a lot of the blame for how badly this war is being managed. And that's what comes back now, that they're saying that this is enough. They don't want to see him anymore. So he is replaced, and the new government comes in. So what will happen? Yeah, well, on the 1st of May, the provisional government claims that it will fight the war to continue the war. This is what the Foreign Affairs Minister of Foreign Affairs, Pavel Milyukov, he calls its glorious conclusion. So they want to continue until the end. And this proclamation leads to widespread demonstrations and calls for Milyukov to resign. This is what's known as the April crisis. So even though, again, it was on the 1st of May, but the crisis is in April, all of this old styling. But yeah, there's a lot of resentment here. And we have here a small quote by the Russian general Nicolai Golovin.
Those who expected that crowds of enthusiastic volunteers would start for the front from the interior, as had been the case in the French Revolution, were making a fundamental mistake. The hidden, but at the same time, the chief driving power behind the Russian Revolution lay in the unwillingness of the mass of the people to continue the war. Right.
Just a short quote to say that this is not a revolution that is going to gather and create this fantastic army that is going to go on to conquer the half of Europe. This is a revolution where people just don't want to fight anymore.
Is this the Alexander Kerensky government? I'm not sure when that comes in or when it doesn't.
That comes in. He is the Minister of War at this point. So he becomes the Minister of War in this new government. It is led by a prince. Actually, the whole notion of where the monarchy is going to be mostly unresolved for the period of time. They're just putting the Tsar aside and don't really know what to do with him. But yeah, it's too complicated. But the result of all these April crisis is that you get a very divided government, because as a compromise they begin to include socialists in the government. In effect, it makes that there's a lot of power struggles within the government, and it makes it very difficult for them to work effectively and to make decisive policy. And this is also seen in the army, because with a new government comes a new army. So for our purposes, let's focus more on what happens at the front. Well, one of the first things that happens is that they issued this, what's called the Petrograd Soviet Order No. 1. And remember, Soviet it's not communism yet. It just means sort of a council in Russian. But Petrograd Soviet Order Number 1 is issued on the 14th of March, and it says that the soldiers and sailors shall only obey the officers if the orders that they give are in accordance with the decrees by the Petrograd Soviet. So basically, if the officers don't follow the guidelines of this Petrograd Soviet, of the provisional government and all that, they don't need to be followed. They also want all units to elect representatives to establish soldiers' committees and to send representatives to the Soviet. So basically, there will be committees that run the units instead of officers. Then they go on to blacklist unsympathetic, untrustworthy, and undesirable officers. And also they go away with standing to attention, saluting, and addressing officers formally. This is all process because they're tired of the soldiers are tired of the way that the officers have been running this war. So this is sometimes called the most democratic army in the world. And that sounds good, except this is an army. So it's not exactly ideal that it's a very democratic institution. And what it results in is basically a complete breakdown in discipline and a lot of problems.
So what happens next?
I mean, it's easy to also just jump because, and I've done this in my notes and everything for you to say now we jump to summer and to what is known as the Kerensky offensive. But it is also important to note that there are actual battles going on along the way. There are lots of fighting here going on. There's there are, of course, small engagements here and there. There's small attacks. This is positional warfare as we know it anywhere else. But some of these are quite big. In April, the Germans, in an attempt to eliminate a bridgehead that the Russians have on the wrong side of the what's known as the Stokhod River, make an attack, and they inflict some 12,000 casualties on the Russians in a day. So these are not just small scale conflict and battles all the time. So there is fighting. But what is really building up towards is that in June, the liberals within the provisional government convince the socialists within the government that a new offensive is needed. So
it's the liberals' fault, you're saying?
Liberals,
you like that, wouldn't you? Yeah.
Politics.
Yeah,
but Gary and Nicolai.
Yeah, exactly. But basically, there is a request again and again and again from Russia's allies to put pressure on the Germans and launch this offensive. So remember where we are. We're in June. So we're just after the mutinies in France. This is important to know. And of course, we're right before the launch of what will be the Third Battle of Ypres. So this is a critical point that if you can put some pressure on the Germans, then maybe something can happen in the West, like we've seen so many times before. But there's also a hope that this, with chaos in the army and all this breakdown of discipline, that if there is an offensive and an operation, an actual something to do and a big thing, then there will be restoration of the discipline in the ranks. And perhaps if there is a successful operation, then morale and faith in the revolution and the government will be restored. And lastly, it's already clear, as we said before, that Russia is probably not going to win this war. But if they have some sort of success, they can sue for peace at some point and maybe have a better bargaining chip in a way. But yeah, as mentioned before, the army is in really poor state, and that's where this Kerensky guy comes in that Pete mentioned before.
And a lot of soldiers don't want to fight, do they? Yeah,
they don't want to fight, and that becomes the job of Kerensky to make them fight. So Alexander Kerensky, he is the Minister of War of the Russian Provisional Government, and he's also sometimes called the Persuader in Chief because he's a very popular man. He has all these weird nicknames, almost like a North Korean dictator, like Prophet and Hero of the Revolution, First Love of the Revolution, Genius of Russian Freedom, all this fancy nicknames that he's given. And he's a brilliant orator. So he sets out on a tour to the front to convince individual regiments and units to fight and to go on the offensive. So this is why the offensive is very much named after him. And there is a lot of work put into this, but he does succeed in a lot of cases. He does manage to actually make a lot of these units and these soldier councils agree to, okay, we will go on the offensive. We will see if we can fight this war to a successful conclusion in some way. But yeah, there's still a lot of resentment in the army. And many soldiers don't want to fight and reject the new government's call for war to continue.
I'll read the next letter because you're doing a lot, so I'll take this one on. This is a letter to the Petrograd Soviet from an anonymous soldier. Very wise of him, I suspect.
I think that's very wise of him, yeah.
We, the soldiers, sit in the trenches in the dirt and water, where every day tens of thousands die and long for peace, while you, the bloodthirsty rulers of the country, are all writing orders for us to fight till final victory. What will freedom be for us when you want us to keep on fighting and when you keep singing the same songs that the old government sang? This will not be freedom, but a new, greater, senseless and bloody war which will devour tens of millions of innocent people and bury every living thing without any benefit to anybody. And also our brother soldiers who, when chosen as deputies, sing the same senseless song to final victory. We elected them because they promised before the election that they would try to get peace. But when they left the trenches, they forgot their loyal comrades. Now they say, let them die, while we, the deputies, are sitting here comfortably in committees. What a way to think. You're only losing the army this way and putting damnation on your own head. Well, that's certainly exactly what they did. I blame those liberals.
So what was Kerensky's plan then?
Yeah, it's pretty much more or less a repeat of the Brusilov offensive of 1916. They want to do, it's almost the same area they want to attack. And by this time, with the Tsar out and the new government, Brusilov is made commander-in-chief of the army in May. He's still a very popular man and one that the Russian soldiers might actually still follow. So they're counting on this last chance to really knock Austro-Hungary out of the war. So
this is victory or bust?
Yeah, this is the last chance to do anything. This is throwing all eggs in the same basket and just going forward and see if you can actually do something. So the offensive in Russian, normally called the June offensive, begins for us in late June. On the 29th of June, there's a massive artillery barrage of the Austrian positions there. And then on the 1st of July, the infantry attacks with some success for the Russians and against the Austro-Hungarians, but we see at an enormous cost. And we have here a quote by General Emil Zeifinger. He's the commander of the 32nd Field Artillery Brigade, an Austro-Hungarian, who is describing some of the early fighting here.
On the top of the Mogila Heights, the Russian 18-centimetre shells and heavy mines put on a hell of a concert. Through dense clouds of smoke and fountains of earth, you could only see the blurry outlines of flying debris. Heavy artillery battles continued throughout the day, but the Russian infantry still stayed put. However, we learned from a deserter that they would set out at dawn. Indeed, the enemy artillery got to work before sunrise, and as it began to dawn, assault waves could already be seen among the Russian barbed wire obstacles on the northern slope of the Mogila. It whistled, hissed and cracked. Thick clouds of gas weighed down on Jezieryanka and Lorin Kopch. Finally, it was now past 9 o'clock. The high tension, which had gripped everything for many hours, was relieved. The enemy attacked on the north slope of the Mogila. In no time, all batteries covered him with a barrage, and to prevent him from advancing, the batteries of the German 197th Division put down a curtain of fire in front of him. After scarcely 10 minutes, our reception had become too hot for him, and he retreated to his trenches quicker than he'd exited them. We were very happy about this, but not untroubled, since the 19th Infantry Division had meanwhile lost Augustovka. At about 10 o'clock, the Russians tried their luck against the beak-like part of the position, southeast of Przezhovsk, and a few minutes later, their waves of attack broke through again towards the Mogila and Zurechi sector. The same thing happened again, and the combined barrage decided the fight in a few minutes. Meanwhile, however, a severe fate befell the inner flanks of the 19th and 54th Infantry Divisions. The sectors of 5 battalions were broken through. The aforementioned attack on our southern wing had scarcely been repelled when red flares rose again on the northern slope of the Mogila and on Zborough Road. Our artillery was too weak to thoroughly block off the wide area, but the batteries of the 197th helped, and so this Russian attack also came to nothing.
Now, I've got another account to read, and this is from a German officer, Ernst Rosenheimer, Heine, of the 96th Infantry Regiment. And he said this, it's the same area, isn't it? We were to march towards the Mogila Hills and prevent the Russians from advancing any further by occupying key positions near Zarudzi. As soon as we left Slona, we got a clearer picture of the situation. Austrian troops were trying to retreat through smaller canyons. Whipped by their drivers, the horses strained and pulled the wagons with all their might, since shrapnel and shell bursts came quite close at times. We could see clearly the commotion and the feverish drive with which everyone tried to get out of the danger zone. We observed fleeing Austrians and wounded German machine gunners racing back breathlessly, never once looking back. Over hillsides, Hungarian cavalry were galloping through undulating cornfields to salvage their cannons from their sights as quickly as possible. Soon they were coming back with them at a fast trot. One Austrian company, under the command of a cadet, was added to ours to lend us support. I was rather dubious about them, as the cadet himself told us these were some of the worst soldiers. They had been pulled out from the front line in order to get more training in Zlotskow. Their Hungarian comrades of the 32nd Austro-Hungarian Infantry Division on the front unfortunately had tough luck, while our own 3rd Battalion already had suffered huge losses near Konuchi due to the breakdown of Austrian troops. The Hungarian units, who were now occupying our positions near Zarudzi on the Mogila Hills, were mostly taken prisoners, barely escaping complete annihilation. So, is it going well for the Russians or not? It seems.
Yeah, I mean, there are some early successes. Actually, some of the main successes here is in the what's called Zborov area, and that's actually carried out by Czechoslovak troops of the Czechoslovak legions, which would play an enormously important role in what later happens in Russia. But they are all former soldiers of the Austro-Hungarian army who've been recruited to fight for the Russians, and they have some success. And there are some other small local breakthroughs, as we can see here. I mean, from the last quote especially, there are places where the Austro-Hungarians simply fall back. I mean, they are a beaten army as well. But it isn't as much a success as the previous year at Brusilov. This is not exactly going all too well everywhere. And soon, just a few days later, on the 3rd of July, the Russian attacks really begins to bog down. And we have here a letter home by an American observer, Donald Thompson, who writes home on the 3rd of July, as we said, was the day that it began to break down.
Well, Russia has at last started her offensive. It was started by Kerensky himself, who, after travelling along the position here for about 30 miles addressing different regiments, led the attack himself. So far, the Russians have bagged over 10,000 Austrians. This attack is in the charge of General Brusilov. The advance was not carried through without trouble. The 12th and 13th Divisions refused to obey Kerensky's order and were surrounded by Cossack troops, especially after they had retreated in the village of Djurkov, which was shelled all afternoon with shrapnel. About 5 o'clock in the evening, the Cossacks charged and captured 500 of these mutinous troops, and the others immediately surrendered.
So things are getting rough.
Yeah, and we can see that there are divisions and units that refuse to fight. I mean, most of them go on the offensive, but some of them meet very little resistance and then decide, we don't really want to do this anymore. And since we have the power to decide ourselves if we want or not, then let's better not. But after the first setbacks begin here, there are a few days of a bit of a stalemate, but then they renew the attacks. They launch a powerful attack led by a guy called Lavra Kornilov, who we will also hear about later, on the 6th of July around the area of the city of Stanislav, and do have some more gain before they are finally halted outside of a place called Kalush. And then what you see is that the Germans begin to send in more and more troops. And by 16th of July, of course, the offensive is pretty much collapsed. And we have here a report from the Russian 9th Army that really sums up what's happening here.
The offensive impulse was quickly exhausted. Most of the divisions are in a state of increasing decay. There is no longer any talk of authority and obedience. Persuasions and orders have lost their effect. They are responded to with threats and sometimes with executions. So, right. So what happens next? What happens? I mean...
Well, we're in for a treat now because the Austro-German army then goes on the counter-offensive in just Galicia in July 1917.
Almost nailed, and you almost nailed the place.
And we're going to have a real treat now because Nicolai is going to tell us what Danish-German soldier Matthias Müller says.
Müller. Yeah, Matthias Müller. I'll see if I can nail the accent on this one.
Yeah, you go for it.
Yeah, but before that, let me just say that it's actually something that they have worked on in theory. This idea, they know the Austrians and Germans that the Russian attack will come, so they're prepared for this offensive. So as soon as the Russians go on the offensive, when they give way and when they reach the point where they can't anymore, they're ready to go on the offensive and launch a powerful offensive. So it's not so spontaneous. It is something that is planned, but we can really see here in this account that I'll read now how the experience is. So he writes, Matthias Müller here, Danish-German soldiers, of course. He writes, it was the first time I took part in an advance. It was extremely interesting. The troops marched as they had learned it in theory and practiced it on the troop training ground in larger formations. First patrols, then the vanguard, a smaller force, liaison patrols, and then gradually the main forces, secured to both sides by flanking patrols. We covered approximately 15 to 20 kilometers. It might not seem very much, but it was quite tiring. We marched with full packing. The horses had enough to pull and were badly fed. The oat rations were not large, so they were quite exhausted. The carriages were not allowed to be loaded with extra luggage. Every moment the column stopped and people waited for it to go on. The roads were not good either, the terrain hilly. In the evening, you had to find quarters. During the day, you didn't see much of the fighting. In the distance, scattered rifle fire was heard. In the evening, the Russians and our shock troops dug into small holes in the ground and kept each other in check by rifle fire at night. Flares were incessantly fired to illuminate the terrain. In the early hours of the morning, the shock troops then again went on the attack and threw the Russians out of the night positions. The Russian troops were in poor condition and very demoralized. Their footwear was worn out, and many had rags tied around their feet. Some ran barefoot. Every day, when we marched across the front line of the night, we met the same sight. Everywhere there were dead, wounded, and invalids who could not keep up anymore. Scattered on the fields were raised Russian rifles with bayonets stuck in the ground, a sign from passing shock troops that there was a body or a wounded person. The roads were the worst. Most of them lay there. The bodies lay in the ditch, completely covered in mud. It all reminded me of battlefields as I had imagined them when I read accounts of previous wars as a boy. On the first day, we passed the former Austrian and Russian trenches. They were all very well kept, a sign that it had been a quiet position, but we didn't get time to take a closer look at the position. The order was simple: onwards.
Wow. Well, normally we get complaints about our accent, and I just don't think that's going to change.
I thought
I'm sorry.
Danish-German accent I've ever heard.
And on that high note, we'll take a short break.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Oh my God, it's the coolest thing ever. Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? Well, check this out. It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic famous foods from restaurants across the country anywhere nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. Seriously. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
Hold that serve. There's no time for pickleball because you're going to want to hear this. Noom now has GLP-1s. No way. Oh, yes way, Fred. Psychology and meds. That's how Noom helps you lose the weight and keep it off.
That's really smart.
Oh, Danny, it's Noom smart. And they start at just $149 and they're shipped to your door in 7 days. Holy smokes, that's fast. But not as fast as my service game. Hey, who's ready to get pickled?
Get started with Noom GLP-1 today. Not all customers will medically qualify for prescription medications. Compounded medications are not reviewed by the FDA for safety, efficacy, or quality.
Right, welcome back. So there were some successful advances, but still the Central Powers, they're losing men, aren't they? And they often face fierce pockets of Russian resistance.
Could you give us a quote to illustrate that, Gary?
And this is German officer Ernst Rosenheiner of the 96th Infantry Regiment. On July 21st, 1917, we're up early in the morning. Colonel Rash takes the company leaders with him into the village. That's a bad name for you, Colonel. Rash. Colonel Rash takes the company leaders with him into the village, where, protected by a stone wall, he gives us detailed orders for the day. Hill 306 is to be taken, and we are to do it, proceeding from our present location at Olcholch. We are to storm the hill at 9:30 a.m. Our artillery starts shooting, but then the attack is postponed to 10:30. Then to 11:30 and 12:30. At 12:15, our attack is cancelled because the Russians are advancing approximately 800 metres to the left. Apparently, our campaign is now suffering from poor preparation and lack of leadership. We're always late in receiving our orders. As a result, my troops and I had already set out for the attack in the morning. We tried to get across the creek to reach Hills 306. Lieutenant Niall, with his troops, was located nearby. No matter where you walked in the village, the Russians would detect you and shoot from their positions higher up. That's how I lost one of my best men, Private Rodderman, through a direct hit to his throat as he was standing in front of a door of one of the houses. At last, we reached the riverbank, ready to cross over. It was a dangerous manoeuvre because the creek was well covered by machine gun fire. The moment we showed ourselves, the bullets came flying. I was the first to take a big leap across. Then I squatted down by the road and leaned against an embankment for protection where the shots whizzed by above my head. The next man jumped but didn't reach me since he was felled by a shot to the head. The next one didn't make it either. Bullets hit his throat and leg, wounding him severely. It was a pitiful sight, blood running down from his mouth and nose. Defying death, the medical sergeant jumped after him and bandaged him as best he could. Machine gun fire rattled above our heads, hitting the hard surface of the road like a downpour. Even grenades came flying at this point. I was now completely cut off from my company, for in this fire it would have been foolhardy to try to jump back to reach them. The situation became even worse when suddenly the skies opened. Soon I literally swam in water that came rushing down from the slopes, but I stayed glued to my spot, for only a slight move of my head caused the Russians to take note. Finally, the sun broke through the clouds again. I had to make a decision. I decided to crawl backwards to the riverbank and tried to jump back. Again, it was a leap for life or death. The minute the Russians noticed me, they directed their fire all along the riverbank. I slipped and hit the water. My last moment seemed to have come. With all the strength I could muster, I wriggled back to my hiding place, getting set for another jump. One leap, and I literally flew into the arms of my men who were standing on the other side.
So, well, I think one point I'd make about this is it just shows you that the fighting is still intense. Both sides are really hammering seven sorts of shit out of each other at times. To use a technical
and it
term.
isn't just a retreat and an easy peasy just follow the retreating men. I mean, there are these holdups and intense fighting along the way, as you say, and that also comes to an end because the counteroffensive is extremely successful. They go quite far, but in the end they do have to stop due to overextension of the supply lines, and also, although we don't really cover it much here, things that happen on the Romanian front. The Romanian launched a successful offensive, what's known as the Battle of, and I'm not even sure that I can pronounce it, Marasti, on the 22nd.
That's correct.
I think it's Marasti.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
I'm going with Nicolai.
Yeah. And they launched that on the 22nd of July, and basically it means that you have to divert troops to that area as well. But the result of the offensive in general is that the Russian army is now even in a worse shape than it was. Brusilov is he tells Kerensky, you have to reinstate capital punishment and discipline in the army, and that is not very popular. Plus, this didn't go so well, so he's replaced by this guy I mentioned before, who's called Lavra Kornilov. As a chief of staff. But there's also a lot of things that then start to happen because it is felt that this is not gone well, and there's unrest at home, what is known as the July days and the Kornilov affair. Just very quickly cover what this means. It is just to sum it up, here's a quote by this Milyukov guy we had before. He says, there's chaos in the army, chaos in foreign policy, chaos in industry, and chaos in the nationalist question. So there is chaos everywhere. But the July days is really just a lot of widespread disorder in the capital. There's anger at the government. There's anger at the problems at the front. And there's a lot of this is started by Bolsheviks and socialists, and they crack down hard on that. They establish a new government in Russia under Kerensky. So now he's the head of the government, and it's a return to a more conservative and hard rule. They kick the socialists out. This is now a more conservative government, like almost what we see a little bit in the Tsarist time. So we've gone a little bit in the other direction. This becomes, of course, unpopular because it's an abandonment of the more liberal direction that was promised by the provisional government. In August, Kornilov, the chief of staff, he is involved in this weird coup that nobody really exactly knows to date what was about. But it's not really clear what happens. But what he does is that he blames the Petrograd Soviet for the collapse of the army, and he's somewhat right with the Petrograd Order, number one. And he seems to work with Kerensky, maybe not. That's a little not really clear. But he's trying to topple the Petrograd Soviet and maybe even reinstate sort of a military dictatorship. But he's beaten off. It's a complete failure, and it really just creates more trouble. It just creates more problems in the army, in the ranks. And it's just some examples. I mean, this is too much to cover here, but it's just examples that there's absolute chaos at home. This is not just happening.
Can I guess who takes advantage of this?
Oh, yeah.
Is it the Germans?
It's the Germans, but also the Bolsheviks, of course.
Yes.
But we'll get to that in a little bit because, there's still after all this and after all this chaos and after the Kerensky offensive, there is still fighting, and the Russian army is still at the front at this point. So the Germans will start to look at a way, because now we're in autumn of 1917, and this as we started with. The Germans really want to end the war in 1917, and we are almost at the end of the year now. And they will start to look at a way to do this and to do it fast. So Ludendorff, he really wants to force the provisional government to the peace table. He wants to put pressure on important Russian cities, St. Petersburg, Riga, all these major cities that are within reach in a way. He wants to straighten his line. He wants to threaten St. Petersburg. He wants to do something. So in early September, actually on the 1st of September, he launches an attack on Riga, what's known as the Battle of Riga. With a bombardment of the Russian positions. We're not going to go into much, but this is where you see the start of the German artillery tactics that will be used the following year during the spring offensive. This Bruckmüller, who is a German artillery general who develops this pattern of firing that we will see, and it is really defined or the effectiveness is really portrayed here at this battle. And then the infantry goes on the attack following the bombardment. And we have here a very long quote, but I think it's a really good quote by machine gunner Dominic
Rickert. This
Rickert.
between me and Gary, just to rest our voices. We're not.
Okay.
Well, I'll do the first two, and then Gary will take over. This is it's an interesting one. Dominic Rickert, 112th Infantry Regiment, and he says this. The dawn came gradually. Hardly a shot was fired. It was the calm before the storm. As it became brighter, I was able to see the water of the Duna, which is flowing quite quickly here. The Russian position on the opposite bank was not yet visible, as white fog prevented us from seeing further. We were all tense about what was about to happen. All at once, the German artillery, which had been concentrated here, started to fire. The shells whizzed over us and exploded on the other side of the river with a booming din. A number of mortars, mainly heavy ones that shoot 200-weight shells, joined the dance. There was such a crashing, whizzing and roaring that my ears started to hurt. As the sun rose, the fog gradually disappeared, and I was able to see the Russian position on the opposite bank. It was completely shrouded in black smoke, constantly, and everywhere there were abrupt flashes and enormous clouds of smoke shot into the air. There was also dense shell smoke at a number of places in the woods further back where the Russian batteries were probably situated, as these too were being given a real lathering by our artillery. This is the Bruckmüller techniques, taking out the artillery, taking out the command centres. That's what's going. So the Russian artillery then open up, and that starts. And for a moment, for a while, as it always is, the boot seems to be on the other foot. And this is what Dominic Rickert says then. We were forced to, as the Russian shells start to crash down, we were forced to duck down in the trench. A direct hit killed and wounded a number of soldiers not far from me. Straight ahead of us, we heard an enormous impact. Dense black smoke drifted over us, and a huge number of clods of earth rained down on us. I looked ahead, beyond the rim of the trench, to where I could see the shell hole. It was as big as a room and had in any event stemmed from one of the 28-centimetre shells. Then, once again, there was a roar, and at the same moment, a terrible impact, this time behind us. The following heavy shells all hit the woods behind us. The barrage of the German artillery and mine throwers went, that's Minenwerfers, I presume, went on and on. In the middle of this din came the orders, "Get ready." We looked at each other. "We can't possibly swim the river," said some of my neighbours. And that's an amazing quote. Because the river, it's not a small river, is it, the Duna?
No, it's a quite big river, and it's one that they've been fighting along for years now, with strong positions on both sides, really.
It would pretty well have been. It looked like it was a suicidal task.
Yeah.
But then now, Gary's going to take up the voice of Dominic Rickert, 112th Infantry Regiment.
Behind us, we heard a yelling as if horses were being driven forward. I looked back and saw that the bridge train was arriving. They rapidly drove the wagons, which were laden with metal boats, across the places in the trench which we had filled in earlier, and took them down to the river. A large number of sappers came up at the double behind them, and in no time at all the boats were unloaded and in the water. Now we were ordered, "Everybody out and into the boats." We were quickly organised, and 20 men boarded each boat. 6 sappers rowed, and off we went across the river. It was very frightening on the water. We all ducked down into the boats. The shells whooshed overhead, while under and around us the water gurgled. Wherever I looked, the whole river was seething with boats, which were heading as quickly as possible to the opposite bank. Russian shells landed between the boats in the river, throwing huge columns of water into the air. Another boat upstream from ours suffered a direct hit and sank in a few seconds. The occupants, who had not been wounded, fought with the waves for a short time and then all disappeared. It sent
Remember, this is also September.
Oh, cold.
This is September, yeah, so it's already quite cold.
When I saw this, I unstrapped my combat pack, opened the waist belt, and put my kit beside me in the boat so that I would be more able to swim if the same fate should befall us. I was afraid that we would suffer from Russian machine gun and rifle fire, but apart from individual rifle shots, it remained quiet on the other bank. Now we approached the shore, and our artillery moved the barrage further forward. Our boat ground its way into the sand. We all jumped out, happy to have firm ground beneath our feet again. Boat after boat arrived, and soon there were hundreds of soldiers standing under cover behind the steep bank, which was about 3 meters high. The current had carried our boat and all the others downstream.
Now, I'll take the next quote just to keep it even. Amazing. They got unscathed across the Duna. That is quite amazing. But it soon becomes apparent why they'd made it across. And this next quote from Dominic Rickard, I think, makes it clear. He says this: the bank where the German infantry position was situated and the barbed... Russian. I said German, didn't I? Sorry about that. Was situated, and the barbed wire entanglement had all been torn to pieces by the barrage. Now we had to storm the Russian trenches. That was an easy task. We did not encounter any resistance at all. The trench had largely been flattened. Mutilated corpses of the Russian infantrymen were lying all around. Every so often you would encounter an unscathed Russian sitting in the corner of a trench, and he would raise his arms in the air when we appeared in order to surrender. There were also fallen Russian soldiers scattered behind the Russian position who had probably been hit while attempting to flee. I looked back towards the opposite bank and could see that the pioneers were already busy constructing a pontoon bridge. Single Russian shells continued to arrive, landing in the river or on the opposite bank. Now, so what happens next? Gary, you're going to take up the story.
Yeah, well, they're ordered to advance in skirmishing lines on the wood, which lay about 600 metres ahead of them. And now resistance began to stiffen. Ooh. And this is Richard once more. To start with, we were covered by a small extended hill, but when we advanced over the top, we heard the rat-a-tat-tat of several Russian machine guns. The bullets whizzed frighteningly amongst us, and several men were hit and fell to the ground. On my command, my team jumped into a shell hole close by. I quickly made an emplacement for the machine gun with the big spade, so that the barrel barely peeked over the surface of the earth. The Russians were firing like mad, with the result that a number of us were hit while digging in. We quickly loaded our machine gun, and in a period of 3 minutes, I fired 4 belts of 1,000 shots. I aimed at the edge of the woods from where the firing was coming and sprayed the bullets left and right, but the Russians' firing continued. In the meantime, everyone on our side had managed to dig in so that the Russian bullets could not do much more damage. It was clear that the Russians had erected hidden machine gun bunkers on the edge of the wood, which we could not deal with. The German artillery came to our assistance. They assailed the edge of the wood with shell fire and shrapnel. With the protection of the artillery fire, we advanced and reached the wood without further losses.
Wow. So I think that's I know it's a long quote, listeners, but I think that quote was absolutely brilliant, showing some of the German advances in tactics, combat assault engineers, in essence, the Bruckmüller barrage. I mean, it's all there.
Also very descriptive. About how to set up that machine gun so that it's literally just on the brow there.
I mean, we're seeing things that we can recognize looking at the next war. Some of the advances into France and into Poland, you see this use of river crossing techniques and this need to move fast and move the machine guns up and bring them into position. So you see a lot of things here that this is very different from the earlier quotes that we had of headlong infantry charges with not much else.
Bit of a spoiler there. Some of our listeners may not have known there was another war.
Yes.
I apologize.
Yeah.
Yeah. To sum up the Battle of Riga, the Germans attacked the Russian 12th Army and forced them to retreat, or really they're retreating on their own. The resistance that these soldiers are most likely facing are by the Latvian riflemen. So these are of course regiments of the Russian army recruited in Latvia. They will also play an important role in the civil war to come.
So they're defending their homeland. The Latvians. They
are defending their homeland. They're defending outside of Riga as well, of course. But yeah, its resistance is futile. Riga was captured on the 3rd of September. So just 2 days later, and you are capturing one of the biggest cities in Russia, essentially. But yeah, there is no real result again because the Russian 12th Army gets away, and Russia does not ask for an armistice. So what do? You do something more, and that's exactly what the Germans start to do. They start to think, what can we do next to force the Russians to do this?
I think what they come up with is Operation Albion in October. But what fascinates me is there are whole books about Operation Albion, and that to me gives an idea of how what a scale this fighting is on. The fact that there are books about Operation Albion, long books.
There are actually 2 books on Operation Albion in English that are quite good. And what's interesting about this operation is, of course, it is a very small operation in the grand scheme of the war, but it's an extremely successful operation. It's an attempt for the Germans to take what's known as the West Estonian archipelago. So if you look at Estonia on a map, there's these 2-3 big islands right off the coast. But what they do is they protect the whole Gulf of Riga. They protect the Gulf towards St. Petersburg, and taking these, the Germans figure, taking these, you can put a lot of threat on St. Petersburg, because on these islands, the Russians have some big naval gun battery, like coastal artillery batteries, huge guns that really protect a large area, and that's what they want to do. But they don't have many troops for it. They have very little, because at this point, everything's been sucked up on the Western Front. The Third Battle of Ypres. That's where everything is going to protect Flanders. So they have very few troops. So they only sent a small land force to fight here, but an enormous fleet. I think it's hard to understand. Of course, the vessels are smaller, but there are more vessels in the German invasion fleet, or whatever you call it, the amphibious fleet here, than there are at the Battle of Jutland combined. I mean, there's so many small weird boats and big ships to do this, and there's quite a big what is known as the Battle of Moon Sound. Is quite a big naval battle between the Russian Navy and the Germans, and really an example of the only successful amphibious operation of the First World War, with landing with support. Yeah, I see Peter is doing eyes at them because we all know which other one I'm referring to.
Yes. The world's biggest failure at Gallipoli, yes.
Yes, exactly. But it is one that is studied. You see it in American literature after the war. You see it in a lot of West Point papers are written on this battle. That's why there is so much on this relatively small operation. But they do an impressive job taking out these islands, silencing these batteries. And things seems to be happening, but really we don't know how important this victory is, because other things intervene. And
what's that? What is it?
Well, we know we're in October 1917, so of course we get to the October Revolution, and again, it's not really. We're not going to go into much of this, but basically, what it is that the Bolsheviks take power in Russia. They topple the provisional government under the slogan of peace, bread, and land. And of course, with peace, is that you need to make armistice and end the war with the Germans. They want to end the war. So that's why I'm saying we don't know if Operation Albion was successful. We don't know if it actually would have brought the Russians to the table, because, well, there's a revolution, and then they come to the table anyway. That was part of it. But yeah, in early December, they sent a armistice commission and asked for peace talks to commence. And we have a letter here from a German soldier named Hermann Labude, I think. I'm not really familiar with that last name. And he's actually writing, he is there to see this event take place, this historic event just outside Dünablock.
At the moment, we're having an armistice from December 7th to the 17th. Here. In my division, it started on the 2nd. The first rumours began to circulate on December the 1st. On the 2nd, I was occupying an observation post, which is exceptionally near the railway. In order to make a sketch from there, I saw that the telegraph wires along the railway embankment were being mended. That told a tale, and I was further enlightened by the arrival in the second line of several motor cars. At 4 p.m, there appeared upon the railway line, which runs between the Russian trenches, the white smoke of a locomotive, and through the storm gaps in the barbed wire entanglements came the Russian delegation. There were about 32 people, officers in uniform, civilians, and, prepare for a shock, 1 female! A thaw was in progress, and in their elegant clothes they hopped valiantly through the deep mud in and out of the shell holes, which were brimful of water. Behind our front line, they were joined by our excellencies. Farther back, they travelled a little way on our light railway until they and their dispatch cases were received by a Pullman car which was awaiting them. In one of the big headquarter towns, they met our Bavarians and the Austrians. During the past years, we've often, as a joke, asked anybody who came in from a forward observation post, "Well, comrade, did you see the peace passing by?" Hilarious. No, on this Sunday, I really did see her, and this is what she looks like. Telegraph wires, dispatch cases, and a special train. That's not the train with what's-his-name in it, is it? No, that's the delegation.
No, which we left out a little bit, but yeah.
Very sensibly left out.
Very sensibly, yeah. I mean, yeah, he's of course describing this delegation coming to start the peace negotiations. But what is of course also part of the story is that this man who's talking about peace and all that, he will die the following year in France. So the war is definitely not over. Yeah, we are now at the end of the year, and there's peace talks, but that does not mean that the war is done on the Eastern Front. Actually, far from it, and we're only entering the next chapter.
We'll be looking at that next time. One point that always fascinated me, and I've just checked it, was that I was amazed. Do you know when Kerensky died? Because Alexander Kerensky, this man who was involved in all this, the man who formed the provisional government, the Minister of War.
Was it in the 60s?
1970. It is absolutely unbelievable how long-lived he was and how he managed to survive it all.
Especially when you know what happened to a lot of these other Russian expats.
Pickaxe in the head.
Yeah,
but he is a fascinating character, and you can read a lot of good biographies on him.
Why didn't we talk about a man in a train?
We'll mention it next time, Gary. We'll mention it next time. We'd like to thank Nicolai once again for being brilliant. He is so patient with us with our fatuous mistakes. Gary, you're so patient with my many mistakes of omission and commission, and I'm sure you want to be nice to me, Gary.
I was really grateful you didn't shuffle your papers all the way through.
What's it made us? Oh! And on that note, cheers, chums.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the show.
Blah, blah, blah.
If you'd like to support us, you can now buy us a coffee. Visit www.buymeacoffee.com/PGMH.
Or visit www.blah.
And we'd be jolly grateful.
Cheers.
Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere, nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Every idea starts with a problem. Warby Parker's was simple. Glasses are too expensive. So they set out to change that. By designing glasses in-house and selling directly to customers, they're able to offer prescription eyewear that's expertly crafted and unexpectedly affordable. Warby Parker glasses are made from premium materials like impact-resistant polycarbonate and custom acetate. And they start at just $95, including prescription lenses. Get glasses made from the good stuff. Stop by a Warby Parker store near you.
Thanks for listening. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook to learn more about each episode. And if you'd like to support the podcast, you have a couple of options. You can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/PGMH, or consider subscribing to the podcast for only £2 per month and get ad-free listening and bonus content. You can find links for both on our Facebook and Twitter accounts.
Sounds great, doesn't it?